Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and it's week 17, Friday evening. So I have not posted since Monday. I did give you my rankings on a post. I hope that found its way to you. And if you needed it for those Wednesday, Thursday games, it was helpful. But let's finalize these rankings. I'm going to give you the injury report on Friday. We know for the most part who's going to play, who's not, who's still on the injury report Friday evening. So we'll go through that. We'll also mention all the weather in those games and then finalize the rankings, tell you how I've adjusted my opinion from Wednesday when I posted all my rankings on the channel previously. So let's get going. There's no time to waste. It might be a long video. So let us begin in the Saturday window. In that Patriots-Chargers game, there is a 20% chance of rain, but I'm not that worried about it. I think it'll be fine. Most of the game plan revolves around running the ball in the first place, but the Patriots are healthy, and I wouldn't worry about any of them in your lineup. But for the Chargers, it's mainly in the backfield where we do have some news. Gus Edwards is out. He had a very good game last week, but he is not going to play. They're going to save him for the playoffs. However, J.K. Dobbins expected to come back off of IR this week. He was activated earlier today, and he is questionable. I do think he'll be on the field. He was full in practice on Friday, so that's very positive news. All the reports are that Dobbins feels good and looks good. I think he'll be the player to start for sure in LA. In that backfield, they really need him. So a very good player. Definitely, I would start him in my lineup. Otherwise, the tight end Will Dissly is questionable, and I am expecting him to play. He was limited for the first two practices, but then on Friday upgraded to full, and he's a game time decision. I am expecting Dissly back on the field. So I don't think I'd be trusting Stone Smart or Hayden Hurst. I think if you're starting a Chargers tight end, it would be Will Dissly, but given he's missed some time, I think it's kind of a crowded target share. I wouldn't be dying to start him. More of a low-end option at the position. But otherwise, on Saturday, we also have a game in Cincinnati that also has a 20% chance of rain. The temperature will be 60 degrees, and I'm not that worried about it, but maybe like that Seahawks-Bears game, the rain does make an impact. I wouldn't be that concerned. I'd mainly worry about Patrick Surtain covering Jamar Chase, but he's healthy. No worries on Jamar Chase. When it comes to T. Higgins, however, he is questionable with an ankle and knee injury, but he was limited all week in practice. He's a game time decision. I am expecting him to play. He exited last week with that ankle injury, but then came back after just a few snaps and was fine. I think T. Higgins will be healthy. The fact that he was limited and didn't have to sit out practice at all this week, I would trust him. So if you have T. Higgins, I think you have to start him, especially with a concerning matchup for Jamar Chase. There might be extra targets headed for T. Higgins. But Tanner Hudson, the tight end, is doubtful. That doesn't really move the needle, but maybe Mike Gesicki gets a few more snaps and targets. For the Broncos, however, their opponent is fully healthy. There's not a single player on offense on the injury report. Even Tyler Beatty, who's missed quite some time on IR, is expected to return. He's fully healthy. The Broncos are fine. Even their second cornerback, Riley Moss, will come back from injury. The Broncos are getting healthy at the right time. In the Rams and Cardinals game on Saturday night, that game is indoors, so if you want to avoid weather entirely, maybe if you have a tiebreaker decision, choose a player in this game. I think that is a major benefit. However, playoff implications are pretty irrelevant. The Rams can lose this game. It's all going to come down to that Seahawks win, and the Cardinals have been eliminated. So maybe that is also a factor. Perhaps they do bench some players on the Rams a little early just because they can. However, in regards to their injury report, the Rams are fully healthy. Even Tyler Higbee, who I forgot to mention last week, is back off of IR. He scored a touchdown, and the Rams are healthy as well at the right time. The Cardinals are potentially getting back James Conner. I think he'll play. He was limited all week in practice with a knee injury and is still listed as questionable, but I do feel optimistic about James Conner. So if you have him, he was excellent last week. The matchup isn't as good against the Rams, but he's been a very, very valuable fantasy player. Maybe he's the reason you're in the fantasy championship. And if you have James Conner, as long as he plays on Saturday night, I would be starting him in my lineup. They're also probably going to have Trey Benson back, so Michael Carter is very irrelevant. Benson is questionable with an ankle injury, but just like Connor, he was limited all week in practice. He didn't play last week, but this week I expect Benson back on the field. So the Cardinals backfield is getting healthier, but then on Sunday in that Bills-Jets matchup, there is a lot of rain expected here, a 75% chance of precipitation. So that could limit the offenses, especially with the lack of mobility in the playoff bracket. Maybe the Bills don't really push it on offense. Josh Allen dealing with a slight elbow injury. He's not on the injury report, but maybe they don't force the issue unless they're really vying for him to win the MVP. That's kind of the only motivation I think the Bills have to play lights out. So a little concerned about that, but I'm still trusting them if they were previously in my lineup, especially with the rain. I would expect more rush attempts for James Cook and maybe the backup running backs as well. But Curtis Samuel, their fourth string receiver, maybe fifth string guy, is questionable with a rib injury. So it doesn't move the needle in fantasy, but expecting to play, I think Curtis Samuel will be fine. For the Jets, they have some weird injury report notes. Aaron Rodgers not fully healthy, but expecting to play. Same with Devontae Adams, also questionable, limited this week in practice, but I do think he will be active. I think they're going for some record book stats with Rodgers and Adams, and I do trust Adams to probably find the end zone. So not that concerned. They have a lot of injuries on the defense as well, but for the most part, the Jets on offense, if you were planning to start them, probably should stay in your lineup. In that Buccaneers Panthers game in Tampa Bay, there is a 35% chance of rain. The temperature is pretty comfortable at 74 degrees, but the wind is also 12 miles per hour. So not fast enough to be concerned about, but I do want to mention it. It's mainly the rain why I would have a red flag there. But for the Buccaneers, they're going to be without Cade Otton for the second straight game. So Payne Durham kind of stepped up, but I wouldn't be starting him. He gets an upgrade. I think mainly Jalen McMillan gets most of those targets, especially because Sterling Shepard is also out, one of the go-to targets in the slot for Baker Mayfield, and it's really just Evans and McMillan. Sometimes Evans does get shut down by this Panthers matchup. Historically, Baker also doesn't play his best against Carolina, but I probably am still starting them. If you're trusting the Bucs players in your lineup, I would still keep them there. They have to win to make the playoffs. I think they play pretty well against Carolina. But speaking of the Panthers, Chuba Hubbard is questionable himself with a knee injury. And while he didn't practice Wednesday, it was reportedly just rest. And then he was limited both Thursday and Friday. I expect Chuba Hubbard to be active. They don't have any players behind him that they can count on. So I think they really need Hubbard and they're not going to risk anything. Hubbard should play. I'm not that worried about it. But Xavier Legette, wide receiver, is questionable. He was full on Wednesday, but that was just a walkthrough. And then on Thursday and Friday, he was limited. So he's a game time decision. I don't know exactly what they'll do. He missed last week, but for the moment, given he was limited, I do expect Legette to probably be on the field. So that really changes the equation for starting any Panthers receivers other than Adam Thielen. I don't trust a specific player other than Thielen in this receiving core. But Bryce Young has been playing better. Maybe you trust multiple. I do not. But then in Cleveland, the Dolphins and Browns game, I am concerned about the weather significantly, especially given Tua is not really the same quarterback in the elements. There is a substantial gust of wind in this matchup, a 19 mile per hour peak in terms of wind, and also a 45% chance of rain. So we have seen Tua not play the same, and it could really be a factor. That is the main reason why I did pick the Browns, but obviously betting on DTR does feel kind of strange. So maybe you are still trusting them, but I think the offense on both sides is really going to be limited given the weather in this matchup. The temperature's 54 degrees, so it's not like freezing or anything, but still rain and wind, not a good combo in fantasy football. The Browns are going to have Dorian Thompson-Robinson active for this game. He was questionable during the week, but on Friday he was full, expecting to get the start in place of Jameis Winston. But speaking of Winston, limited all week with a shoulder injury, I think he remains the third string emergency quarterback. Bailey Zappi would be the backup in Cleveland. But David Njoku did not practice at all this week, and he is out. He is not going to play, so he gets a ton of targets, but he's not available this week, and that's a bummer if you're counting on him. I would not be starting Jordan Akins, though. I do not trust him at all. Jerry Jeudy was on the injury report earlier in the week, but is active, no concern there. And then for the fourth straight game, maybe even the fifth straight game, Cedric Tillman out with a concussion. Pretty shocking that Tillman has been out this long with a concussion, but given there's nothing to play for, maybe that's the main reason. I don't want to assume anything, but damn, 5 weeks with a concussion, that's a long time. On the opposite side of the ball for the Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa is questionable with a hip injury. Not good at all. Limited all week and maybe just a game time decision, but I would expect him to play. They're probably just being cautious. It's the end of the season and no reason to force it, but maybe they still have a chance at the playoffs. I do expect him to be on the field and vying for that win. But Tyreek Hill, questionable himself with a wrist injury, and that's no surprise. He's been dealing with it for several weeks now. He was limited all week in practice, and that's mainly just rest. Expect him to play. He's over 30 years old. Tyreek Hill should be fine and active this week. But then Jaylen Waddle did not play last week. He's questionable for this one with a knee injury. He did not practice Wednesday, but then on Thursday he was limited, same on Friday. So he is moving in the right direction, and I do expect him to play. It's not ideal, but still I think Waddle will be on the field. Hopefully the wind doesn't impact them too much, but I think both Tyreek and Waddle are just flex plays because of that. In the Eagles-Cowboys game, there's a 10% chance of rain, 61 degrees, so weather's not a huge factor, but maybe there is a bit of rain. And then the Eagles are going to be without Jalen Hurts, who is out with a concussion. He did not practice at all this week, and their playoff spot is pretty much locked up. The only thing to play for is pretty much the Saquon Barkley record, and I understand why Kenny Pickett, even if Hurts is available next week, will finish out the season as the starter. I do not think Hurts will play again until the playoffs. But I also think A.J. Brown gets a big upgrade because of this. We saw Kenny Pickett kind of lock on to him, and A.J. Brown was questionable during the week with limited practice sessions, but it was just rest. He was full on Friday. He is active, no longer on the injury report. He will suit up against the Cowboys. But for the Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb is out for the season, and he will not step on the field. I have no idea who's going to be their number one target. It might be Jake Ferguson. He's had some good games against the Eagles historically, but maybe Kevontae Turpin or Brandon Cooks offers the most value. You need a touchdown in this offense. I wouldn't trust anyone other than perhaps Rico Dowdle. But even that, I'm not that excited. This matchup could be very low scoring, given two of the best players on both teams are not available in this one. But Jalen Tolbert, questionable with a finger injury. He was limited all week in practice. I do expect him to play, but that is kind of interesting. Another backup receiver, Jalen Brooks, questionable with a knee injury. Did not practice Wednesday, but then limited Thursday. A game time decision. I wouldn't be trusting any Cowboys receiver. I don't trust any of them at all. But then in the Giants-Colts game, there is a 20% chance of rain, 56 degrees. Not terrible, but still something to raise your eyebrow at. And then the Giants are going to start Drew Lock once again. He was questionable during the week with a shoulder injury, limited in practice, but then he was ruled active off the injury report. Lock will be the starter this week. However, Malik Nabers might not be available. He's questionable with a toe injury, and he did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. Limited Friday. He's a game time decision. They're optimistic about it, but in my opinion, it's a 50-50 call, and I really don't know for sure. So you need a backup plan for sure, and I would maybe consider Wan'Dale Robinson. He saw a lot of targets last week, but I'd rather just pivot to a different player in a different game. I don't trust the Giants receivers as good flex plays other than Malik Nabers. Tyrone Tracy, though, appears to be active. He was questionable during the week with an ankle injury. Did not practice Wednesday or Thursday, but then on Friday he was limited, and they have ruled him active. He's off the injury report. Tyrone Tracy will play on Sunday. For the Colts, Anthony Richardson, I don't think will suit up. He did not practice at all this week. He was watching Joe Flacco take some first team reps. And while they haven't ruled him out, he's questionable, a true game time decision with a back and foot injury. And I don't think it really is going to matter. I don't think he'll play. I think Flacco will be the starter, and that means maybe a few more targets for the receivers, but Flacco's probably just handing it off all game long. I expect, just like last week, for them to lean on Jonathan Taylor. Alec Pierce, though, with a concussion, was full all week in practice, and I do expect him to play. And Mo Alley Cox, questionable, did not practice Wednesday, not expecting him on the field. Kylan Granson didn't get a single target. Maybe you'll take a shot on Alec Ogletree, but only in DFS. I would not start him in the fantasy playoffs. In that Jacksonville Titans game, there's a 50% chance of rain, 69 degrees, but the rain is probably a legit factor. So perhaps you don't trust the passing game as much, but in general, I'm always starting Brian Thomas. In the Jags offense, Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, and Trevor Lawrence have been on IR for several weeks now, but Brenton Strange, questionable early in the week with a shoulder injury, will play. He is active, limited Wednesday, Thursday. On Friday, he was full. So Brenton Strange is good to go, but then the Titans are probably going to have Tony Pollard as a game time decision once again. He did not practice for the third straight week on any single day. He played through it both times, but obviously Tyjae Spears has been more involved for that offense, especially on the goal line. Tyjae has 4 touchdowns the last 2 games. So I would be starting Tyjae, not Tony Pollard. However, Tyler Boyd, questionable himself with a foot injury, and him I do not expect to play at all. Did not practice at all this week, and maybe just like Pollard, he finds a way onto the field. But with Boyd, I don't think he'll be available. I think Pollard will suit up, though. However, probably not worth starting, in my opinion. Nick Folk, their kicker, is out. So if you were planning on starting him, you need a backup plan. In the Saints-Raiders game, that game is also indoors. So maybe that does boost the offensive output a little bit, but neither team is that safe on offense. And for the Raiders, they have Zamir White, Sincere McCormick, Gardner Minshew, and DJ Turner on IR for at least multiple weeks now. But Dylan Laube was dealing with an illness. He is active. He's good to go, but I would not trust him. I'd only be starting Abdullah or Madison as a flex play. But in the Saints offense, Olave, Shaheed, Taysom Hill, and Bub Means have been on IR for multiple weeks as well. But I'm also not expecting Alvin Kamara to play. He's been ruled out. So has Derek Carr. Neither of them will be on the field. So we're getting Spencer Rattler again, along with Kendry Miller. This offense is probably going to be maybe not as bad as last week, but still pretty unstartable in general. But MVS is questionable with a chest injury. He was limited all week in practice. He did not play last week. Maybe that helps Rattler out a little bit. Juwan Johnson, also questionable with a foot injury, but upgraded to full on Friday. He is now active. Juwan Johnson will play as well. In the Vikings-Packers game in the afternoon, the Vikings are fully healthy, and given it's on their home field in a dome, weather's also not a factor. I think there could be a ton of offense in this game. I think if I'm deciding between 2 players and they are suiting up in this Vikings-Packers game, I'd probably pivot to that player as opposed to one dealing with the rain in an outdoor matchup elsewhere. So the Vikings definitely get an upgrade because of that, but the Packers may be without Tucker Kraft. He was questionable this week with a hip injury, limited Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and I am expecting him to play. Luke Musgrave did suit up last week. He got back on the field, but he's dealing with an ankle injury, limited Wednesday, Thursday. I think both of them will suit up, but I'm only starting Tucker Kraft. Last week, Musgrave was not involved enough to downgrade Kraft. I was a bit too low on him in the rankings. He didn't find the end zone, though. Had about 8 points. Nothing special, but not terrible. Not bad at all. Marshawn Lloyd, no surprise for him. He's been out all year long, out once again. But Christian Watson is a true game time decision. Questionable with a knee injury, did not practice Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. Didn't practice at all this week. But according to Matt LaFleur, they are still optimistic. He actually suits up. It's still possible. They haven't ruled it out. If he does, then maybe don't trust the other receivers as much, but I think Dontavian Wicks, Jayden Reed, and Romeo Dobbs would get an upgrade without Christian Watson. He's actually been their safest receiver in terms of yards, but touchdowns have gone elsewhere. I probably am not dying to start a single Packers receiver, but maybe without Christian Watson, Jayden Reed does tempt you a little bit. On Sunday evening, we have the Falcons and Washington game. That game is in Maryland, and there is a 45% chance of rain as well. The wind will also be 16 miles per hour. It's not terrible, but still something that's more relevant than otherwise, and the temperature will be 60 degrees. It's mainly the rain why you would be concerned. But for the Falcons, it's just their kicker who's out. Young Hui Koo is on IR. Riley Patterson is the backup behind him. For the Commanders, we know that Austin Eckler, Noah Brown, and Austin Seibert are on IR themselves, but maybe next week we do get Eckler back. His IR window will be available to be opened and come back to the field in week 18. I think they probably save him for the playoffs, though. Terry McLaurin is active. He was questionable during the week with an ankle injury, limited Wednesday, Thursday, but then full on Friday. Terry McLaurin is good to go. But De'Ami Brown has been ruled out, so that number 2 receiver spot is open. I think Olamide Zaccheaus has really proved something. Last week he was phenomenal, and maybe Jamison Crowder also finds the end zone once again, but I'd probably only trust Terry McLaurin. Zacchaeus, however, is an interesting flex play. I did rank him in the top 40 receivers this week. The Niners and Lions game is the last game on the week. That's a Monday game, and there's a 5% chance of rain, but probably doesn't happen. 54 degrees, weather's kind of irrelevant in Santa Clara on Monday night. But the Lions might not have anything to play for. According to Dan Campbell, even if the Vikings lose and that number 1 seed is locked up, they will be starting everyone and still be trying to win this game wholeheartedly. So I wouldn't be that concerned, but maybe if the Vikings do lose, there's a chance that they don't force it with guys like Goff or Jahmyr Gibbs. I doubt it, but given there's still week 18, I don't expect them to be benching players with 2 weeks left to go, especially if they're locked in to the 1 seed. Like, why would you give your team 3 weeks of rest and a chance to get rusty for when it counts most? So I do expect the Lions to be playing with Dave Montgomery out. I'm definitely starting Jahmyr Gibbs, Khalif Raymond, Michael Badgley also on IR. The Lions should be fine, but I wanted to mention that slight red flag in terms of an opportunity to bench starters. But the Niners with Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, Jordan Mason, and Elijah Mitchell on IR, that's what was expected. We've known that for a while. But Isaac Guerendo, I think will play. Questionable with a foot injury and hamstring, but limited Thursday and Friday. And I think on Saturday he'll be limited again. So I think he'll play. We will get more clarity tomorrow. If there is any news, I will update you tomorrow, but for the most part, I am planning for Guerendo to suit up. So Patrick Taylor, pretty irrelevant. Guerendo has a ton of upside. If you have Guerendo, if you can save him for Monday, we'd rather know beforehand, but still, I think I would start Guerendo. I think it's worth it. But you want to make sure tomorrow we'll get a bit more clarity after he practices regarding the Monday status. So that's it for all of the injury report news, all of the player updates to mention, as well as the weather updates. I don't think there's anything else I left out. So let's get into some rankings. I do want to bring up some positive matchups for the quarterback position. We're going to start at quarterback, where in general, Brock Purdy does get an upgrade, a very good matchup against Detroit, but for the most part, a lot of the best matchups are for irrelevant quarterbacks. Like, you're not starting a lot of the guys that have these upgrades. But Baker Mayfield versus the Panthers technically gets an upgrade. However, historically, he's been really diminished in terms of his stats against Carolina. Baker, though, I think has earned your trust. I do rank him as a top 10 quarterback. But Justin Herbert at the Patriots also gets an upgrade, a top 10 matchup for him. And lastly, Bo Nix at the Bengals. While they have been better lately on this season, the Bengals are a big upgrade. I would trust Bo Nix a decent amount. I think he'll be contributing a lot in the run department, padding those numbers with some very, very valuable rushing stats. So those are the good matchups, the ones that I think matter the most. However, there are some big downgrades to mention. A lot of these players are probably in your lineup. For instance, the worst matchup of them all would be for Sam Darnold versus Green Bay. But so many playoff implications, there's no weather to worry about. At home, Darnold has been lighting it up. I would still be starting Sam Darnold, but on paper, this matchup is worse, especially after that Spencer Rattler matchup last week. So maybe they're skewed. I still think it's a slight downgrade, but Darnold should probably be fine and remain in your lineup. Interestingly, Bryce Young ranks as a top 10 quarterback in fantasy the last month, number 8 at the position with 18.8 fantasy points. That's pretty shocking for Bryce Young, but he gets the Buccaneers this week, and that is a big downgrade as well. Not a good matchup at all for Bryce Young. Jared Goff technically gets a matchup, but he's been lights out. I would definitely be still starting him, but the Niners are a downgrade on paper. Then there's a downgrade on paper for Jordan Love at the Vikings, but given there's no weather, I probably don't care. It's mainly turnovers why this is a bad matchup. Otherwise, they give up a lot of yards. Not a ton of touchdowns, though, to quarterbacks. Then Joe Burrow versus the Broncos gets a downgrade. They have been better lately, but that's because Riley Moss was injured and they were not the same defense. I think it's technically a bad spot here for Joe Burrow, but I'd probably still be starting him no matter what. And then lastly, Tua Tagovailoa at Cleveland. It's a pretty average matchup. However, the weather probably combined with this spot on the chart is a legit downgrade. I'd be worried about those players: Darnold, Bryce Young, Goff, Love, Burrow, and Tua do deserve a slight downgrade in general. The only ones who get a boost in value would be Purdy, Mayfield, Herbert, and Bo Nix, in my opinion. So that's the matchup news I wanted to mention at quarterback. Here are my updated rankings. I have Lamar Jackson, who I did rank at number 1, followed by Josh Allen. I think given they're probably going to use week 18 as a bye, I think they're going to sit all of the starters next week against the Patriots in week 18, save them for the wild card round. There's no chance the Bills get that number 1 seed, but they want Josh Allen to be the MVP. I think they're going to really play well here against the Jets. I think Allen has to be started. I had him previously below Jaden Daniels, and I did swap him along with Joe Burrow. I think Allen should be number 2. I don't know if he'll be as good as Lamar, but still, there's no way you're benching Josh Allen. I know last week, though, was a dud. Maybe he cost you a spot in the championship after such a bad performance against the Patriots. But I do think he's a top 2 play. I think because of the MVP conversation, Josh Allen will have a good game. So he jumps Jaden Daniels and Joe Burrow, in my opinion. I mentioned the downgrade of a matchup for Burrow, but it's mainly my boosting confidence for Allen, why he's going up above them. And then Jared Goff, I think, is a bit safer than Sam Darnold. I mentioned the worst matchup on paper for Darnold is the Packers, but Goff has been playing lights out lately. He's the quarterback 2 in scoring the last month, and if you have Goff, I wouldn't be benching him. I have him right behind Burrow at number 5. He moves up above Darnold, but I did remove Jalen Hurts, who was previously top 5 in these rankings, so that's the main reason why everybody else is moving up 1 spot, and Purdy moves up because of that, and Bo Nix, I think, is a bit safer than Jordan Love. I mentioned the upgrades and downgrades. Bo Nix gets a far better matchup at the Bengals than Love does at the Vikings. Love has also been handing it off a lot lately, but I do think the receivers have to step up. The Vikings are good at stopping the run, and I do think Love will have to put up 30 points on the scoreboard. I envision at least 2 passing touchdowns for Jordan Love this week. I think a safe play is Love at Minnesota. But at number 10, I do have Baker Mayfield, who I think will play well, but I'm a bit concerned. Historically, against the Panthers, he plays like shit. It's always worse on the road than it is at home. This game is at home, and there's a playoff spot on the line. If they lose, they're out. So Baker has to win, and I think he will. I think Baker's still a top 10 play, but obviously I had Mahomes ranked behind him, and Mahomes played really well. I wish I ranked Mahomes a bit better, but against the Steelers, I was a bit worried about it. Mahomes played very well on Christmas Day, and I faced him in the playoffs. Obviously, he may cost me a championship. But then we have Herbert and Drake May moving up 5 spots, and I previously had them below Caleb Williams, Russell Wilson, and Geno Smith. So I bumped down Anthony Richardson, who I previously had at number 14, but I think Herbert and Drake May will contribute in the run department, and I think they're decent floor plays. Herbert has been a good floor play all season. Drake May also contributes on the ground. Sometimes he offers like 70 rushing yards, and I think May will contribute a lot in the rain in that regard. So I trust them from a floor standpoint. I would be expecting at least 18 points from both Herbert and Drake May. I have them both ranked top 13 at the position, and technically I did have Caleb at number 13 yesterday, but a difference of 1 spot along with Russ and Geno Smith. I thought they'd be better super flex options. Obviously, I didn't envision a lack of touchdowns from all of them. So that was pretty crazy, but it is what it is. Kind of a weird slate of games early this week on Thursday and Wednesday. But then at number 17, moving up 2 spots, we have Matthew Stafford as Hurts and Richardson get taken out. Nothing really changes in my opinion. But after looking at the numbers for Bryce Young, I have to rank him higher. I bumped him up 7 spots overall, previously number 25, now number 18. And Bryce Young, this is so shocking, but he's a top 10 quarterback lately. Bryce Young is averaging 18.8 fantasy points per game. That's quarterback 8 in that span, even more than Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Bo Nix, and many others at the position. There's only 7 players who have been better in fantasy the last 4 weeks than Bryce Young. So he's pretty impressive. The rushing yards and rushing touchdowns have really been there for him, and maybe he contributes in that regard again. I think he's a top 20 play in Superflex. I'd definitely be starting him. But if I was going for the championship, I would not be starting Bryce Young. There's no way I'm dropping my starter for Bryce Young. No thank you with him. And then Kyler Murray also moves up one spot along with Aaron Rodgers, with players moving out and Young jumping them. It's one spot. And then Tua also moves up 2 spots, where Kenny Pickett and Flacco do enter the rankings, is at 23 and 24. Nothing that significant. Definitely not starting either of them. These 2 backups are pretty rough to trust. And outside the top 20, I would be benching all of these quarterbacks. I don't trust Tua in the rain and wind. And then everyone else, I have a reason to really, really fade in general. So these are the updates at quarterback, mainly some changes in the top 5. And then after that, once Jalen Hurts gets taken out of the mix, the only other changes are really Herbert and Drake May moving up, along with Bryce Young. That's really it overall at quarterback. So that's it there. Now let's talk about running backs, where in terms of positive matchups, we do have Jahmyr Gibbs going up against the Niners, who are the second best matchup overall. The best matchup you could ask for is the Bengals, but I'm not starting a Broncos running back this week. That one is pretty much wasted on Denver's backfield. So the best upgrade would be Jahmyr Gibbs at the Niners. Then it would be Tyjae Spears at Jacksonville. Technically, if Pollard plays, he gets an upgrade, but he has not been healthy. I definitely trust Spears on the goal line in Tennessee. But then Ramondre Stevenson gets the Chargers. They've been definitely a better matchup lately. Their defense has kind of sucked overall in the last few games, but Ramondre Stevenson also plays a lot better at home. I actually think Stevenson is a good play this week, a high-end flex option, in my opinion. But then the Colts are also giving up a lot of points to running backs, so Tyrone Tracy gets an upgrade. Maybe Singletary vultures him, though. And then Bucky Irving and Rachaad White get the best matchup on the season. The Panthers give up way more points overall to the position than anyone else. So definitely start Bucky Irving and Rachaad White this week, along with J.K. Dobbins. The Patriots are not that scary against running backs. They've been top 10 in terms of matchups all season long, giving up over 23 points per game. League average is 19. Then Kyron Williams, definitely a lock in your lineup, also gets an upgrade, along with Bijan Robinson. Same with him. You're not benching Bijan this week at all. James Conner also gets an upgrade against the Rams, and then Breece Hall and the Raiders running backs also get an upgrade. Recently, those 2 defenses, the Bills and Saints, have been playing better, but on the year, they are top 10 matchups overall. So those are the upgrades at running back. I definitely am trusting Jahmyr Gibbs, but maybe Tyjae Spears, Ramondre, and Tyrone Tracy enter your flex discussion. However, in terms of downgrades, I would definitely be worried about Chuba Hubbard this week. Vita Vea and that Bucs defense is really stepping up. They are stopping the run way, way more than anyone else. So on the season, they're more like a league average matchup, but lately, a brutal spot to be in. I'd be a bit worried about Chuba Hubbard here. And then Rico Dowdle at Philadelphia also gets a downgrade with no CeeDee Lamb. He might get more volume, but the offense might be even worse and come off the field a lot more often. But then Jerome Ford also gets a downgrade, along with James Cook technically against the Jets. Those defenses have really stepped up against the run as of late. Same with Dallas. Their defense is playing way better. On the season, it's a good matchup, but lately the Cowboys are a big fade. But if you have Saquon Barkley, I wouldn't be benching him at all. So Barkley's still a lock in your lineup. Then the Texans were a tough matchup, but they already played. The Vikings, however, are a bottom 3 matchup on the season. So Josh Jacobs, technically on paper, gets a downgrade. I'm definitely still going to start him, though. Then we have the Raiders, who are stepping up a worse matchup lately. They get the Kendry Miller matchup, so not starting Kendry Miller. And then the Falcons get Brian Robinson, who's been playing like shit. He had 2 fumbles last week. I would not trust Brian Robinson right now. And then lastly, technically, the Browns are a downgrade for Devon Achane, but with all the wind and rain, I expect a lot of volume for Achane to cover this downgrade. Overall, I'd still be starting Devon Achane. So those are the matchups to mention at running back. Now let's mention what I've changed at the position in my rankings. And in the top 5, I did make a few changes. Because of the playoff implications of this game, it's pretty relevant. I think they're going to try and get Saquon as close to the record this week so that they can give him as much rest the following week. If it's only like 40 yards left to hit the record entering week 18, then yeah, he'll probably play. But they're not going to bench him for 2 weeks before the playoffs. I really doubt that happens. So I think Barkley, especially with Kenny Pickett, is going to get like 30 touches here. I think they're all going to be rush attempts. That's all they're trying to do, just crack that record. If they can get close to it by the end of the game, then Barkley will play in week 18 just to try to break it. But if he doesn't get close, then they'll probably just sit him entirely next week. And I think because of that, I think Barkley will be a true stud, the RB1 this week. It's kind of just an assumption. I could be wrong, but the only player I bumped him above would be Jonathan Taylor and Jahmyr Gibbs, and I'll mention my logic on them. With Taylor, he's been bad for like almost all season. Last week, though, his volume was insane, and for some reason at the end of the year they always give Taylor like a monster workload. I don't understand why they don't give him more to start the season. Maybe it's the week 14 bye that they keep getting, why they save it for the end of the year, but for some reason Taylor is getting like a lion's share of touches, and expect another 30 plus this week. Taylor was lights out last week, and if you somehow have him in the fantasy playoffs in the championship, go ahead and start him. If he helped you advance last week, you know for a fact you're starting him. But I do think Saquon might get more volume, so that's why I do have Saquon ranked above Taylor as of now. But then I did have Gibbs at number 1 earlier in the week, but I mentioned the playoff implications for the Lions because of the risk that the Vikings win and the Lions are just locked into the 1 seed. There's a chance that Gibbs does not finish the game or does kind of take a seat early for Craig Reynolds and Jermar Jefferson. It's possible, and that's why I downgraded him 3 spots. But if you have Gibbs, you know you're not benching him. It's an upgrade of a matchup for sure. It's just a question of, will he play all 4 quarters? So that's why I have him below Bijan Robinson. There's no chance they're benching Bijan. This is a must win. It would almost guarantee the playoff spot if they got it. So Bijan against the Commanders, I think, is a heavy contributor. I'd rather go Bijan at 3 than Gibbs at number 4. But at the top here, to change anything, like, it's kind of very irrelevant. You know you're starting these 5 players for sure above the purple line. These are the elite of the elite. Then in the second tier, I did upgrade James Conner with the news that he probably will suit up. Conner is tied for Josh Jacobs in the last month with 20.7 points as the RB1 in fantasy. So last week and the week before were major reasons why. While he did leave early, it looks like he'll play this week, and if you have James Conner, there's no way I'm benching him. The injury is the only concern. If not for the injury, I'd probably rank him in the top 5, maybe even above Josh Jacobs, but definitely starting James Conner now at number 8 in the rankings, previously number 15, and that's why Kyren Williams does move down 1 spot. But I did swap James Cook with Chuba Hubbard. It's a downgrade of a matchup for Chuba Hubbard, and while he's getting a ton of volume, I'm not going to bench him. I don't think he's top 10 this week at number 11. He's a little bit more average, in my opinion. So still a must start. Last week was way too good to bench him, but Hubbard at number 11, maybe not as good as James Cook, given there's also a lot of rain in Buffalo. But then Bucky Irving does move down 2 spots as well, as he gets jumped by James Conner and James Cook. It's a great matchup for Bucky, though. It's just a question of what will the touch split look like with him and Rachaad White. But in general, nothing really changes for these players as 2 players go above them. But then J.K. Dobbins gets inserted at number 15 in the rankings. I previously had him unranked. I thought Gus Edwards would be the guy. Now Gus Edwards is out. Dobbins is going to play, and while he's still questionable, you need to make sure. It's Saturday morning. I think he'll be fine. They activated him for a reason off of IR, so they need 1 more win to secure a playoff spot. Dobbins will be a heavy contributor, and he also gets a good matchup here against the Patriots. So definitely start Dobbins at number 15. He's been a very safe play. RB 14 before he got hurt. With an average of 14 points per game, I would expect something similar from Dobbins. So definitely a must start at number 15. I would absolutely have Dobbins in my lineup. As long as Guerendo is playing on Monday, I would be starting him as well. And I think he's actually more of an upside swing than Aaron Jones. Jones sometimes doesn't find the end zone, and I did downgrade him behind Dobbins, Guerendo. He also got jumped by James Conner in these rankings. So 3 spots lower, not anything too crazy, but a little bit lower. And then Rachaad White and Jerome Ford, I did swap as well. I'd rather go Rachaad against the Panthers than Jerome against the Dolphins. It's a much better matchup for Rachaad, but Ford gets some wind and rain. Maybe Ford is fine as well in the top 20. I would be starting Jerome Ford, but Breece Hall gets jumped by Dobbins, so he moves down. I did insert Zach Charbonnet here exactly where I ranked Kenneth Walker on Wednesday, and hopefully, I kind of feel like if you had Charbonnet and Walker, you knew what the deal was. So I didn't mention it before Thursday's game, but it's not like Charbonnet found the end zone. He wasn't great in the first place, and at this point, the expectations are kind of limited overall. This is where I ranked Walker, though, right behind Breece Hall. So I slotted in Charbonnet here to mention it. But then we have Tyjae, Rico Dowdle, and Tyrone Tracy staying put because Brian Robinson moves down 4 spots, and I would be very concerned about Brian Robinson in general. The Falcons are not a good matchup. He also fumbled twice last week, and his touchdowns have been fading. Jaden Daniels is now throwing a lot of touchdowns. They're not handing it off as much in the red zone. So Brian Robinson, a very low-end flex play, not my favorite at all. Definitely a liability, but he was really good in the beginning of the year. If you were counting on him previous to the playoffs, then maybe go for it. But as a flex play, I'd probably pass on Brian Robinson. But I kind of still feel too low on Ramondre Stevenson. Not only does he play excellent at home this season, he also gets a good matchup against the Chargers. So I bumped him up 7 spots overall, I think at number 26, just like Brian Robinson. He's on the higher end of the flex conversation, but still a little bit risky. I could be too low. I could envision him having a touchdown and maybe like 70, 80 yards. Ramondre might be a good play this week, but at 26 on the season, he's been kind of mediocre. I'd probably pass on Ramondre. At 26, though, you could do a lot worse. Not a terrible bet, in my opinion. But because he moves up, that's why all these other players move down 1 spot. So no change in opinion on them. Just wanted to mention Amir Abdullah, Alexander Madison, Bigsby, Etienne, Warren, Najee, and Swift are also in that flex conversation, but 3 of them have already played. Good luck with the Raiders and Jaguars backfield. That's always a bit of a nightmare. And then at 34, we have Antonio Gibson moving up 10 spots. Like I mentioned, that Chargers matchup is really good, as well as the fact that Gibson has been heavily involved in the offense. Gibson is actually a top 40 running back, averaging over 7 points per game. His volume has increased as of late. So Gibson at 34, an interesting floor play, decent matchup, but outside of flex consideration, I would be benching Gibson. But I'd rather start him than Tony Pollard, Kendry Miller, Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, Estime, and Javonte Williams. Outside the top 40, though, you're definitely not starting anyone. So those are the updates at running back. We'll show you the rankings again at the end of the video. Now let's move over to the wide receiver position, where I'd like to mention some upgrades in terms of matchups. The Vikings have really been a good spot for receivers all year long. They're tough against quarterbacks because of interceptions mainly, but receivers do torch them pretty often. So Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, and Romeo Dobbs get an upgrade at the Vikings. Maybe if Watson doesn't play, you would consider Dontavian Wicks. He has back-to-back games with a touchdown. But then the Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson get the Buffalo matchup, and that has been really good lately. The Bills secondary has been ass at the moment. But Terry McLaurin and Olamide Zaccheaus also get an upgrade against the Falcons. They have been getting torched, a top 3 matchup as of late. Then A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith get an upgrade on paper against Dallas. But with Kenny Pickett, I'm not dying to start both of them. I would only really trust A.J. Brown. He had a ton of targets. Kenny Pickett kind of locked on to Brown last week. So maybe Devontae Smith, more of a liability, but technically an upgrade for both of them. And then against the New Orleans Saints, Jacoby Myers also gets an upgrade. Maybe he's a bit safer as well this week than he was last week. And then against the Browns, it's technically an upgrade for Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle. But with the weather, the wind, and the rain, I probably don't want to start them that much. I don't trust them that significantly in the weather with Tua. Then the Raiders and Bears are technically good matchups right now as well, but it didn't prove to be true for the Chicago matchup. The Seahawks passing game was limited, and I don't trust Marquez Valdez-Scantling with Rattler against the Raiders. So I'm kind of ignoring these 2 matchups. I think the next best upgrade would be Jacksonville, who go up against Calvin Ridley and Nick Westbrook-Akine. Maybe some touchdowns loom for them. And then the Eagles matchup has been better lately, but kind of hard to trust. Jaden Daniels torched them, and I kind of feel like it's mainly a downgrade in general against Philly. So not going to consider that for the backup Cowboys receivers. But lastly, this Detroit matchup has been pretty good on the season. They are above average. So Deebo Samuel and Juwan Jennings do get an upgrade in general, and those are the beneficial spots to be in at receiver this week. But in terms of downgrades, we do have some negative matchups overall, and the worst on paper would be San Francisco going up against Detroit. So Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams have probably earned your trust, and weather's also been a factor in this matchup as well. Maybe Diamador Lenore, though, is that legit? I'd still probably start Amon-Ra and Jameson Williams. Then the Ravens matchup was tough for Nico Collins, and that proved to be true. The Packers matchup is tough for Jefferson and Addison, but just like the Lions receivers, they've been so lights out, I wouldn't bench him. I wouldn't really care about it. But Malik Nabers, if healthy, does get a downgrade against the Colts. They have been a tough spot as of late. Then Drake London and Darnell Mooney also get a downgrade with Michael Penix not throwing any touchdowns last week. I don't know how much you trust that for London and Mooney. It's a downgrade against the Commanders. Then the Bengals have also kind of stepped up lately on defense in the secondary. Cortland Sutton might not be as safe, but I'd probably still start him. And then Adam Thielen against Tampa Bay, probably the only safe receiver they have, does get a downgrade. But on the season, the Bucs have been a lot better. They've kind of stepped it up in the last 5 games. Then Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua get technically a downgrade here against the Panthers. I probably still am starting Puka. Marvin Harrison at the Rams, also a downgrade for him. He's not that safe. Neither is Cooper Kupp. And then Ladd McConkey at New England, technically a bad matchup, but I don't really care. And then lastly, Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan against the Panthers, technically a downgrade of a matchup as well. I'd still be starting both of them though. So that's it for the matchups at receiver. Now I'll show you the updates at the position. And I didn't change much. If you have anyone in my top 18, the top 2 tiers, I was telling you to start them. I did not change a single thing overall at that position. But I did take out CeeDee Lamb, previously wide receiver number 19. And with him no longer available, he's out for the rest of the season. Everyone behind him should be moving up 1 spot. But I did swap Jameson Williams and Jalen McMillan. McMillan almost had 2 touchdowns last week, but one of them was ripped away from him. And without Cade Otton, I expect a lot of that volume to continue. But given Jameson Williams has a higher ceiling, and personally I have both of these players, I am going to start Jameson Williams in my fantasy lineup. I decided to be honest with you and show you what I'm going to do myself. I do have Jameson Williams now 1 spot above Jalen McMillan, but I love both players. I think both have very high upsides this week, tremendous ceilings for both of them. I would be starting them high-end flex options, in my opinion. I also told you to start Zay Flowers and Xavier Worthy as top 21 receivers back on Wednesday, but then Debo, Juwan Jennings also move up 1 spot. I think they're pretty safe against the Lions. And Drake London is healthy. He did exit last week's game early, but at Washington, I would be starting him. It's a must win, and I do think London will be a top 25 receiver. But Malik Nabers is a game time decision, might not play, but if he does, I think you have to start him at wide receiver 26. The volume is too high. While the touchdowns rarely hit, I think if Nabers is on the field, he's definitely a top 30 receiver at the position. So start him. He also moves up 1 spot with CeeDee Lamb getting taken out. But the only player really entering this tier that previously wasn't would be Adam Thielen, moving up 9 spots overall. Maybe if Leggett plays, I'd be a bit concerned, but the Bucs matchup is actually a pretty decent one on the season. And I also looked in the numbers for Bryce Young. Bryce Young is playing very well, and it should help out Thielen. Thielen is very reliable, usually finds the end zone. So I would trust him. I think at wide receiver 27, the floor is pretty high, and I would trust him for a touchdown in this matchup. So I did bump him up 9 spots. I would probably start him at wide receiver 27, but just above Jayden Reed, there's a lot of upside against the Vikings, and maybe with Watson out, that's also a reason to trust him, but Jayden Reed has had some stinkers. I'd understand benching him if you'd rather not trust him. But outside that tier, we have Tyreek Hill at number 29. Then Garrett Wilson, a positive matchup for him against Buffalo, so I upgraded him 4 spots as well. And then Khalil Shakir and Jacoby Myers at 31, 32, followed by Olamide Zaccheaus. I think at that point, you're just swinging for the fence with upside. Last week he had 2 touchdowns. I do think he's the number 2 receiver in that offense. And Daniels is slinging it at the moment. But Jaylen Waddle, I think, will play at wide receiver 34 with some weather to worry about. I'm not dying to start him, but maybe there's some upside. He did play well before the injury. But Devontae Smith, I did downgrade, now knowing Kenny Pickett will be the starter. Kenny Pickett almost only has eyes for A.J. Brown. While Devontae Smith will get some targets, it will not compare to the volume A.J. Brown will get. So Devontae as a wide receiver 2 with risk, just like Jaylen Waddle, not my favorite play, but in that flex conversation at 34-35, you could consider Waddle or Devontae Smith in your lineup. Then we have Ridley moving down 1 spot as Waddle jumps him. Then DK Metcalf, I had him at 37 back on Wednesday. And then at the bottom of this tier, I did upgrade Marvin Harrison Jr. because there's no weather to worry about at all. That is a kind of a tiebreaker to upgrade him a little bit. And then Josh Downs and Michael Pittman are definitely a bit safer with Joe Flacco as the quarterback. But I don't know what the passing volume will be in this offense. Last week, they almost strictly ran the ball, and it wouldn't shock me at all against the Giants if they just leaned on Taylor once again. So Downs and Pittman could be valuable, but given that Colts offense, it's not like Flacco played well before getting benched. I'd probably still bench both of them, but now they're in the flex tier above the orange line. I would probably expect about 9-10 points from both of them. So top 40 receivers, I'm probably benching them at the lower end of the spectrum. Maybe you'll consider them if you're desperate though. Outside the top 40, I'm definitely benching all these players. I have no more faith in Cooper Kupp. I think they're just saving him for the playoffs. Jerry Jeudy with Dorian Thompson-Robinson is not the same player at all. Nowhere near the same volume in the passing game. Weather's also shit there. And then Christian Watson may not play. He's a game time decision, so I did have him a bit lower in the rankings. Now back to back with Romeo Dobbs. In this tier, I would not be starting either of them. I'd only probably pivot to Jaden Reed for the sake of upside. But then Rashad Bateman and Marquise Brown, I did have them as low-end flex plays earlier in the week. Followed by Darnell Mooney, Keon Coleman, Quentin Johnston, Kayshon Boutte. None of them are safe enough to trust. But at 51, I did upgrade Kevontae Turpin. With no CeeDee Lamb, someone in that offense has to step up. He's pretty fast, so just hoping for a deep touchdown with him. And then MVS, kind of the same situation. If he does play, it's not Derek Carr throwing him the ball, but maybe he does have some upside in this same tier. You could talk me into it in DFS, but not in the fantasy championship. So they jumped Nick Westbrook-Akine. That's the last player in that tier, and the last player I did rank on Wednesday. Beyond him, Rome Odunze, Wanda Robinson, DeAndre Hopkins, Tim Patrick, Yoshivas, Calvin Austin, Jameson Crowder, Jalen Tolbert, and Ricky Pearsall round out the top 62 at receiver. So that's it for the updates at receiver. Now let's mention tight end, where overall there are like kind of minimal upgrades in general. The tight end matchups aren't really the safest to buy into, but still I will mention them. There is a positive matchup here for Will Dissly against the Patriots. All of the top matchups are against irrelevant teams, though. Like, the Bengals are the best matchup against Adam Troutman. No fucking chance. The Chicago matchup was good for Noah Fant, but that didn't work out. The Steelers were a good matchup for Travis Kelce and Noah Gray, but only Kelce was valuable. The Texans matchup was good for Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. Then the Chiefs were good for Pat Freiermuth. I did rank him top 10. But then Miami against Jordan Akins, I don't care about that. The Colts against Theo Johnson, who the hell cares? And only until we hit New England is it actually relevant for Will Dissly. So the upgrades are pretty irrelevant this week. I don't really care that much. But then we have Buffalo against Tyler Conklin. He had a good game last week, but I wouldn't trust him. Then the Packers are an upgrade for TJ Hawkinson, but pretty minimal, kind of league average. And then we also have Payne Durham here versus Carolina gets an upgrade, but wouldn't trust him. And lastly, Juwan Johnson against the Raiders is technically a good matchup on the season. However, historically in the last 5 games, they have been a lot more difficult overall. So those are the only positive matchups at tight end. There's a lot more downgrades I'd be more concerned about. Like Zach Ertz against the Falcons. This is a terrible matchup on the season, one of the bottom ones you could ask for. And then lately, only 3.7 points allowed, by far worse than anyone else. So no thank you with Ertz this week, but maybe you'd trust him for a touchdown. I'd understand still starting him. Then we have a downgrade on paper for Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper against the Chargers, but probably not that significant. Then we have the Niners as a bad matchup for Laporta, but I think you're still starting Laporta with his upside. Then Trey McBride against the Rams gets a downgrade. Last week he was shit, but in general, he's been pretty good. And then Brock Bowers at the Saints. Technically it's bad, but I don't give a shit. I'm definitely starting Bowers. Then George Kittle against Detroit, also downgrade on paper, but who the fuck cares? And then Brenton Strange versus Tennessee. I probably now would not be starting Brenton Strange after his collapse last week. But then lastly, Kyle Pitts also gets a downgrade. Kyle Pitts has been shit lately, and I'm not starting Kyle Pitts. That's for sure. So just wanted to mention those upgrades and downgrades at tight end, but mainly my rankings did not change at all. I did take out David Njoku as well as Cade Otton from the rankings. Njoku used to be in the top 7 at the position. So now that he's gone, I'm definitely not starting Njoku. I told you to start on Wednesday George Kittle, Brock Bowers in the elite tier. Then in the second tier, we had Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, Sam Laporta, and Jonnu Smith. I think if you had any of them, there's no chance you benched him. But then at number 7, I think we dropped down a tier. Tucker Kraft is a little bit risky, but still a must start, top 10 tight end. And then with no David Njoku, we did upgrade everyone else behind him at least one spot. We have Chigo Okonkwo, who's been dominant with Mason Rudolph lately, a ton of targets. He's a must start, top 10 play. And then Freiermuth, I thought had a good matchup. No touchdown, but I did tell you to start him as a top 10 play as well. Then Hunter Henry has been reliable all season along with Zach Ertz, but Ertz technically gets a downgrade. Maybe you're a bit worried about it. I'd still probably trust him for the sake of a touchdown. Then Noah Gray, Travis Kelce. Kelce was a bit better than I expected. Gray was not. Then TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Schultz. Schultz already played, so did Isaiah Likely. With Cade Otton coming out of the rankings, that's why these players move up a little bit. But then the only player I'd probably consider as a flex option if I was desperate off the wire would be Austin Hooper versus the Chargers. If you're trying to replace Njoku, probably Austin Hooper is the best option you can get off the wire, unless Chigo Okonkwo has already been taken. So that's kind of all the updates I wanted to mention. At tight end outside the top 18, it's pretty irrelevant, but we do have Jake Ferguson, Kincaid, Will Dissly, and Cole Kmet in the top 21. Beyond that point, I'm not starting a single tight end after that. So those are the updates at tight end. Lastly, I did make a few changes at defense, and here they are. I kind of felt like ranking the Raiders and Dolphins at 1 and 2 feels a little unsafe. I did downgrade both of them 3 spots, and the Bucs are now my number 1 defense this week. Versus Carolina, it's a must win. I think they will step up. Their defense has been playing better as of late, so it sounds like a good matchup on paper. I'm going to trust Tampa Bay at home as the best play against Carolina. I think it'll be a very low-scoring game in that one. But then the Bills probably dominate the Jets. I think they're also a safe play at home. And I did upgrade the Eagles defense, given that the Cowboys are now without CeeDee Lamb. They move up 5 spots now to number 3. And then I have the Raiders and Dolphins in the top 5. I think they're the safest plays overall. But I did tell you to start the Steelers and Chiefs. I wish I did not tell you to start the Steelers. Damn, they really let me down. I started them in the fantasy championship, and my opponent had Kansas City. I got burned with a -1 from the Steelers. So bad call there, good call on the Chiefs. I wish I had them higher, though. Then I have the Colts at the Giants. They should probably be a safe play. And then I upgraded the Cowboys defense because it's Kenny Pickett. I previously thought maybe Hurts would suit up, so I had the Cowboys at 14. Now at number 9, they've really stepped up lately, and I think Micah Parsons still tries to play well against a division rival. So they're top 10 in my opinion, a decent start. Then we have the Chargers at the Patriots. I think they dropped down a tier because they played poorly lately. But then the Titans, Jags, Seahawks, and Rams are the last defenses I would consider in the top 14. Outside the top 15, I don't think I'm trusting any defense, but I will show you all the rankings here on the screen. At defense, here are the top 32 at the position. I'm only starting the top 14 as I mentioned, but I'll leave it up in its entirety for a few more seconds. All of the defensive rankings here on the screen. Now let's show you the tight end rankings here. All 30 options. I kind of just flashed it a few seconds ago, but still all of my tight end rankings are here. So if you still need it, go ahead and pause it. But now let's move on to quarterback, where these are the top 32 at QB. So I'd be starting the top 13, I think all the way through Herbert and Drake May. You're going to get over 18 points. And then in Superflex, I'd be starting all the top 20 options. But once we hit Tua, that point, no thank you. I'm definitely passing on the quarterbacks outside the top 20. So here they are, the quarterback rankings. You can pause it if you still need it. But now let's show you the running back rankings. Here are the top 40 on the screen. And it's mainly just an adjustment on James Conner, who's a true must start. J.K. Dobbins enters the top 15. I lowered Aaron Jones just slightly, but still starting him. And then I also loaded Brian Robinson, now to number 25. You can probably bench him if you don't need to start him desperately. And then Ramondre also moves up 7 spots. I think he's also in that flex conversation, but probably not the safest bet in general. Kind of a bottom of the barrel flex play, in my opinion. So that's it at running back, the top 40 here on the screen. You can pause it if you still need it. And then here are the wide receiver rankings, the top 60 at the position. I mainly only changed my opinion on Adam Thielen, who moves up 9 spots. I did swap Jamison Williams and Jalen McMillan. And then Garrett Wilson a bit safer in a good matchup against Buffalo with Adams kind of banged up. And then Waddle enters the top 35. Devontae Smith moves down. And then Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, and Marvin Harrison Jr. enter the top 40. Otherwise, it's all players you're probably benching for the most part. So those are all the updates in regards to my rankings. Again, apologies for not the same schedule this week, but I hope this does everything it needs to. I think it worked out. I think it's fine. Hopefully it worked out for you. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. I will still make content next week. I promise you that. I may put out another video tomorrow as well, on Saturday, if there's any last minute news. But that's it for today. My name's Adam Riancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. Nice and blunt.